Hello everybody. This is lesson 7 of lecture International Economics. I will discuss slides 150 to 170. In this section I will give an overview of various policy concepts or doctrines how to practice the trade relationship with foreign countries. We will start with the free trade doctrine. There's actually only one country practicing a regime of nearly free trade, the city of Hong Kong. Nevertheless, the free trade doctrine has many supporters among economists since Adam Smith and David Ricardo. The standard argument of the free trade doctrine are the welfare losses of trade restrictions. Restriction of free trade by tariffs or quotas causes too little consumption and additionally too much production compared to a free trade regime. This results in the welfare losses we have discovered so far. So the argument is actually based on these little pink triangles we have found in our analysis. Attempts to measure these efficiency losses empirically led to the following results. In a cross-country study of the economist William Klein, the one-time gains from a transition to free trade in percent of GDP are typically below 1% of GDP. Only for developing countries, he has found somewhat larger gains from free trade. A couple of single country studies for earlier years that measured the costs of trade restrictions in terms of net domestic product indicates also that gains from free trade are higher in developing countries than in developed countries. If you compare the number for the United States with the number for Brazil. All in all, these gains from free trade are not extremely large. There are, however, also other arguments in favor of the free trade doctrine. One of these arguments is based on the effect of free trade on competition. Free trade might strengthen domestic competition. In many areas, economies of scale play an important role today. As a result, without free trade, there are often relatively close national oligopolies or monopolistic competition with only a few national suppliers. Free trade increases the number of suppliers. The resulting increased competition leads to lower prices, higher supply quantities, and more product diversity and or quality, typical results of more competition. In addition, competition is increasing the pressure for innovation. Increased research and development activities lead to more technological progress, which has a positive impact on productivity growth. This leads to a further argument for free trade, the impact of free trade on innovation activities. This impact runs not only via increased competition, there is also an additional effect that leads to more research and development activities. Research and development expenditures are typically lumpy production factors. It is therefore always necessary to have a certain minimum size of research activities in order to be successful. A single researcher is typically not as creative as a group of researchers. In addition, in many research areas, the equipment needed has a certain minimum size. That is to say, the smallest optimum capacity is relatively large. Research and development expenditures are therefore typical fixed production factors. Therefore, fixed cost degression arises. The larger the production quantity, the smaller the average research and development costs. Since free trade allows companies to have larger sales and hence higher production volumes, the average R&D costs are smaller under free trade. So, under free trade, we have larger production quantities than under autarky, and as a result, this fraction that measures the average research and development costs is smaller under free trade as under autarky. Therefore, under free trade, there is an incentive for more research and development activities, since it is simply cheaper. The more technological progress results from research and development activities, the more productivity growth results for the whole economy. In mathematical models of the so-called new growth theory, it is possible to show mathematically that free trade causes higher GDP growth rates than autarky. This means that the transition to free trade can not only result in one-time efficiency gains, the welfare gains of the static analysis we have just observed, but to permanently higher economic growth. If the assumptions of the new growth theory are correct, free trade has much more importance for long-run welfare than the static analysis of classical trade theory shows. This diagram gives an idea how strong the long-run growth effects of free trade can be if it causes relatively small increases of the yearly growth rate of GDP. After 50 years, measured here on the x-axis, a 0.5 percentage point higher growth rate causes an overproportionate increase of GDP due to the so-called compound interest effect. To sum up, 3 arguments can be made in favor of free trade. First, efficiency gains of the classical trade theory. Second, the strengthening of competition and the resulting welfare effects. And third, increase of research and development profitability leads to more research, and as a result we can expect higher GDP growth. It is, however, also possible to put forward a number of economic arguments against the free trade doctrine. Three arguments are often used in this debate. First, in case of market imperfections, restrictions on free trade can lead to net efficiency gains. Second, if a country is large enough to influence the world market price, the government can organize a de facto monopsony via an optimal import tariff, and this can increase domestic welfare, however, at the expense of foreign welfare. Third argument is, in the case of imperfect competition, monopolistic gains can be redirected from foreign markets to domestic markets via government subsidies. This is called strategic trade policy. In the following discussion, we will focus on the first and the second argument. So let's have a closer look at the first argument. If there are market imperfections, a restriction of free trade can sometimes lead to net efficiency gains. An important cause for market imperfections are technological externalities. For example, the production of a good causes cost advantages for other industries, for which the producer, however, receives no compensation. In this case, we talk about positive externalities. The classical textbook example for a positive externality is beekeeping. The primary product of beekeeping is honey. But we all know from our biology classes that bees also fructify the flowers of fruits, vegetables, or cereals. Therefore, beekeeping increases agricultural output. According to the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation, the total economic value of pollination by bees comes close to 153 billion euros in 1 year. So, without beekeeping, agricultural productivity would significantly decline. Let's assume this diagram describes the domestic market for honey under free trade. So on the x-axis we measure the volume of honey consumed and produced at home, and on the y-axis we measure, as always, the price. The world market price for honey is PW. We would have a total demand for honey equal to Q consumption under free trade, and domestic production equal to Q production under free trade. The difference between consumption and domestic production would be covered by the imports of honey. Now let's assume that we introduce an import tariff. We've already done the analysis, so it should be no problem. If we add an import tariffs, the domestic price will grow above the world market price by the level of the import tariff. As a result now, domestic consumption will fall from this level to this level, Q consumption under the tariff. So consumers would lose this little triangle here due to the import tariff. You've already done the analysis. On the other hand, domestic production would grow given the higher domestic price after the introduction of the import tariff. The production level would grow from this level under free trade to this level, intersection point of the higher domestic price now with the domestic supply curve. The result of this would be a loss of welfare by too much production. Domestic costs are higher than the world market price by this area, by this triangle D. So we have seen in our analysis of the consequences on import tariffs, this is also a welfare loss. So we have a total welfare loss equal to the triangle D and the triangle F. To remember, the area E is not a welfare loss, but is equal to the tax income of the government from the import tariff. The lower diagram reveals now the welfare gains of domestic honey production, which are caused by the pollination of flowers by bees. If this curve here measures the marginal social return of domestic honey production, then the welfare gain from this increase of domestic honey production caused by the imposition of the import tariff would lead to a gain, social return, equal to this area here. Let's call this area H. It represents the additional welfare gain by domestic honey production. The area H is, I think, clearly larger than the welfare losses D plus F, and therefore this import tariff causes domestic welfare to grow. So in this example, the introduction of an import tariff would indeed lead to an increase of welfare. However, of course, this does not have to be so necessarily. The size of the area H depends on the strength of the positive externalities, and this strength is, in last instance, always an empirical question. The example shows that in case of market imperfections, an artificial support of domestic production by import tariffs can increase welfare. However, it's of course also possible to make a counter-argument, kind of criticism of criticism. There are also alternatives to an import tariff that would lead to fewer welfare losses. For example, in case of positive externalities, the encouragement of production by an optimal subsidization of production would lead to more honey production at home without causing welfare losses from an import tariff. But I would not like to go into the details here, just to make clear that there are also alternative policy measures compared to an import tariff. Now let's come to the second argument in favor of import restrictions. The so-called optimal import tariff. If a country is large enough such that its demand and supply can influence the world market price, the government can organize a kind of domestic purchasing monopoly, which we call monopsony, via an optimal import tariff. It is possible to prove mathematically that in the case of a large country, the optimal import tariff for one country is always larger than zero. However, this is not a win-win policy because, as we will see, such an import tariff reduces the welfare of other countries. If foreign countries retaliate with their own optimal import tariffs, the net effect of an optimal import tariff can again be negative for all countries. To prevent such an optimal tariff raise, mutually binding free trade agreements can be chosen. We will discuss this in section 1.3.3, where we discuss the World Trade Organization, which is in fact such a free trade agreement. In the following, we will analyze why such an optimal import tariff is possible. This is a numerical example that contains the basic idea of the optimal import tariff argument. Let us assume that the world market price for a kilogram coffee is equal to 8 euro. If a country, let's say A, is large enough to influence the world market price with its domestic demand, the introduction of an import tariff in country A will reduce the demand of country A and hence the world market price. So if the government now introduces an import tariff for country A equal to 4 euro per kilogram coffee, domestic price will go up and as a result domestic demand will go down. This leads to higher demand on the world market, since country A is by assumption large enough, so the world market price will fall. To make a clear example, let's assume that the world market price falls significantly from 3 euro to 5 euro. The result of this would now be a price in country A after the introduction of the import tariff equal to 9 euro. 4 euro import tariff plus 5 euro world market price of coffee. If we add this up, the result is 9 euro. So, by the end of this adjustment process, coffee becomes more expensive for domestic consumer as it was before. They pay a price of 9 euro instead of 8 euro. However, the burden of this imposition of an import tariff is quite unequally distributed because domestic consumers pay only 1 euro per kilogram more. It's a relatively small additional burden. However, domestic producers lose, compared to the situation before, 3 euro because they receive now, instead of 8 euro, only 5 euro from selling a kilogram coffee. So their net loss of this is 3 euro. And now it becomes clear that the import tariff, the largest part of the import tariff, is not paid by domestic consumers, but is in fact paid by foreign producers in terms of a lower world market price. So the largest part of this import tariff is in fact paid by domestic producers, €3 of €4, and only a small part has to be paid by domestic consumers. It is possible to generalize this numerical example. It is even possible to prove mathematically that an optimal import tariff can always be established if the demand of a country is large enough to influence the world market price. So this is not just one numerical example, but it is an argument that will always be possible if the assumption that we have made here in the beginning, that the country is large enough to influence the world market price with its demand, in this case, such an optimal import tariff is always possible. We can also use a two-country model to display the argument. In the initial situation, a free trade regime is given in order to balance the market in country A, country B. The world market price must be at a level where the exports of country A equal the imports of country B. We have already discussed this two-country case. In this case, the demanded quantities of country A and country B add up to a value that corresponds to the sum of the production volumes of country A and country B. The overall demand of both countries is thus equal to the total supply of both countries, such that a global market equilibrium is given in this initial situation. This is the equilibrium world market price, where this import volume of country B is equal to this export volume of country A. There's only one world market price where this is the case. Since these two countries represent the world, we can call the price world market price for simplicity. Now let's assume that country B implements an import tariff equal to this level. As a result, the import volume of country B would fall from this level here under free trade to this level given the import tariff and the world market price. However, now country A can no longer export this volume as before, because the exports of country A must be equal to the imports of country B. So, given this price in country B, the exports of country A would fall to this level. So this shows that the demand of country B influences the world market price. The world market price will fall now. Of course, we need an equilibrium. As a result, the world market price has now find a level where the exports of country A are again equal to the imports of country B, while the consumers in country B must pay the world market price plus the import tariff. And again, there's only one world market price where this is actually the case. So there's a unique world market price where the exports of country A equal the imports of country B after the introduction of the import tariff. Now we have a new market equilibrium. However, the price in country B is higher as it was before, when the free trade world market price was given. As a result, now consumption in country B falls from the old level to this level, and production in country B grows from the old level to this level here. On the other hand, in country A, production falls because the price is now lower as the price on the free trade. So production falls from the old level to this level, which is given by the intersection of the world market price after the introduction of the tariff and the supply curve of country A. On the other hand, consumption in country A will grow since the price is now lower as it was before. Now we can apply our welfare analysis. We are of course only interested in the welfare of country B that has introduced the import tariff. The import tariff revenues for the government of country B correspond to this area here as before. It's always the import tariff times the import volume. We can subdivide this area in area A and B. The area A belonged before the introduction of the tariff to the consumer surplus of country B. It therefore represents a redistribution of domestic consumer welfare to the government. Area B, however, has been created by the reduction of the world market price. It is financed from the welfare loss of the producers of country A. Total welfare loss of the producers in country A is this surface here, this area here, which is labeled with capital letter E. Since the area E is larger than the area B, part of the former welfare of the producers of country A is now lost. It is a net welfare loss. The same applies to the areas D and C of country A. Before the implementation of the import tariff, the areas C and D had been part of domestic consumer welfare. So they are now a welfare loss to domestic consumers. However, if we compare the size of area D and area C with the part of domestic import tariff income of the government that is paid by the producers of country A, the area B in other words, then this area B is, I think, quite clearly significantly larger than the area C plus D. So domestic consumers lose less as the domestic government wins from the payments that come from the producers of country A. As a result, we have, in fact, a net welfare gain from country B. However, this welfare gain is at the expense of country A. And now it is of course questionable whether country A will apply with this new situation. It is likely that country A might figure out whether it is not able to implement import tariffs on other markets where country B is exporter to country A. That is the problem with this kind of trade policy. Nevertheless, it should be clear that such an import tariff is possible and that the primary effect is an increase of the welfare of country B. So much for this lecture. In the next lecture, we will study a trade policy doctrine called import substitution policy.